So before we start, let me repeat uh, let me repeat this thing that I gently ask you while I'm doing this boring introductory part. I gently ask you to follow this link, open it, and answer a couple of questions. It will give us a lot of interesting data, which I'll show you tomorrow before my second part of this talk. And I think we'll learn a lot about how we use Rails and how we manage complexity within Rails. So I think it's pretty important and it would be pretty interesting. And let me start with my talk. So we all love Rails, and this is why we're here. But we know that sometimes they make us suffer, so they can hurt us. And sometimes we switch to new projects and we hope that this time it will be different. So this time, and sometimes it's different, but in a new way. So it makes us feel pain in a different way. So some of us, they develop new frameworks, they develop new languages, or just switch to another languages because they can no longer deal with it. But what about the rest of us who are just trying to get our job done? So what do we do? I think we've developed some kind of empiric set of rules, a set of habits on how to deal with Rails. So no callbacks, if possible. No concerns, please. Fat models, skinny controllers, maybe. So this is just an example, right? So everyone has its own set of rules and we try to follow them, but they are not explicit, they are more like implicit ones. And of course we try new techniques, we visit conferences, we hear like new stuff, and we try to embed new techniques into the way we develop software. And another thing I want to say is that Ruby is a powerful language, right? And it allows us to build a lot of cool, handy tools. And sometimes we are amazed of the beautifulness of these cool tools. But the trick is that power is dangerous and it can be harmful. And although I like the new style of the conference website, I want to point that the previous one actually reflected very good idea that we need to learn how to control the power. And good teams, they actually develop constraints that allow them to control that power. All right, to summarize, I created this stupid meme just to show that the main idea we have. And now to the intro, like who I am. I started using Rails in 2006, pretty long time ago. Apart from programming, I did a lot of different stuff, like freelancing agencies, conferences, lean poker, teaching, and all this crazy stuff. And I spent a year being GitLab developer advocate, but this role, in this role, I didn't touch their code base, which is pretty stupid, but anyway. And yeah, because of this, I have stickers. If you need them, they are there, and there's plenty of them. That's a good thing about being working in GitLab. You have a supply of stickers. So, and I was in the same spot 3 years ago, and this is when I started, like, the whole thing started for me. Like, I discovered finally the patterns, the solid principles, all this stuff, and I learned how to apply them in my Rails applications, and I shared this stuff. I created this website where I wrote down a couple of things I learned and understood. I even started writing a book, and like you can still leave your email there and you will get a first chapter, but there is like no more chapters yet. Because I think the situation where I was like that I still had more answers than questions. And now to the interesting part. How I ended up being here. Like, I've not been developing with Rails for in the last 3 years, and I still am on the stage. So yeah, the trick is that recently I decided to refresh my Rails knowledge, and I found another freelancing customer, and I like remembered all the things I knew, and developed the project. And of course I used all the techniques like services, form objects, all the stuff I learned, but I wasn't quite satisfied with the result. That's the trick. And then I was lucky enough to attend one workshop. It was held by another Russian guy, and it was 2.5 days long, and my mind was blown away by what I've heard and what I've tried. And it was like he was telling me the contents of my book I was going to write. So this is and what I decided, like, since I had no active project to apply all the stuff I learned, but I really wanted to remember all the stuff, not to forget anything. So I decided to apply to a conference to give a talk. So I have a reason to summarize all the knowledge. So I sent the proposal to the most thoughtful Ruby conference, and like so far is the most favorite, my most favorite Ruby conference. And the organizers, they were so amazed by this proposal, they even kicked out 2 speakers and gave me like the best time slots on both days. So here I am. Yeah. So let's finally start, and let's start with a few statements. Yeah, sorry, I am for sure will be not the most well-prepared speaker, but I have a serious intention to be the most impactful one, or at least to shake your beliefs. So let's start with let's use our imagination, right? And what would be an ideal system we want to build? So an ideal system must oppose or resist to a bad code, like React does. So in React, even for junior developer, it's pretty hard to write bad code. So it's structured in a way so the layers are thin and they oppose you. So I'm not saying it's impossible, but it resists you. All right. So the second thing is that the system we are building, it shouldn't fight against the framework. It means it should use defaults if it's possible. And the third thing is that ideally there should be only one way to do a certain thing. Because programmer shouldn't be an artist who just had an inspiration and decided to do it in this way or in this way. So a programmer should be an engineer who analyzes different ways of doing this, chooses the best way and standardizes this and makes it a rule in his system. So that's an idea. But also we have to deal with reality. And in reality, we are lazy. Sometimes we are not lazy, we are just tired or ill or have other things to think about, like family stuff. And we don't have like enough mental power to think about decisions we are making. So I think relying on discipline while building such system is a bad thing, because discipline burns your mental energy, and mental energy is expensive. When I think about the system that relies on discipline, this picture is quite good, because it's a working system, but it requires a lot of discipline and coordination to work. And this looks more like a Java project to me. So the next thing is that there is a theory, there is a practice, and there is a dream. And in theory, everything is beautiful. In dream, everything is even more beautiful. And reality sucks, we know it. So in reality, there will be always a certain amount of dirt, and we have to deal with this. We can try to build beautiful abstractions, but at some level they start to break. But also a good thing that problem is dirt is not the problem itself. Until it spoils your system, it is okay. And if it helps you to build a good system, then it's more than okay. All right, we're finished with statements, and now we can finally start with beliefs. And the first belief or habit we've developed is a flat model structure. So we all do like this. So we have models folder and we put our stuff there, and it's kind of fine on the small projects. But then the project gets bigger, and for example, in Redmine we have 70 models and one folder. GitLab is better. There are 16 folders and there is probably some structure inside. But still, on the top level, there are 130 models. And Discourse, the best Ruby on Rails forum solution, 170 models and 0 folders. So imagine yourself coming to this project and trying to understand the structure and what models are more important and what models are least important. Now you have a good challenge. So instead of this, the suggestion is to use hierarchy based on entities dependencies. It's somewhat connected or related to an idea of aggregation root, but if you don't know what it is, it's not important. Let's take a look. So what we have, for example, if we have an article and there is a comment and a link which belong to this article, then you simply create a folder and put your models there. Because without article, they don't make sense. So you just group them into folders. And of course, this affects the way your tables in database are named, but it is also a good thing because you, like, in its name, you define what it is. Like, if a comment makes no sense without article, then it should be article comment. Good thing that it is fully supported by Rails, so you simply have these namespaces, and the worst thing that could happen is that you have to define this class name in the first model, because Rails can't can deal with the deep hierarchy. Okay, so it makes it easier to understand what is your application about. The most important things there on top of your hierarchy, and you can simply explore your system by going into the folders and see what it is all about. It has zero long-term cost, so if you start doing it, actually I encourage you to start doing it from the day number 1, because if you try to refactor, then you have to deal with all these names, and it will be a little bit harder. So Rails fully supports this. Sometimes we need to specify class name, and like a good thing and a bad thing is that you have to think about dependencies, like what models are dependent on others, and group them accordingly. The second thing is flat controller structure. Like almost the same. We have a controllers folder, we put everything there. the structure is plain, and then it gets bigger, and we have like plenty of controllers. And another thing, that if we take a look inside those controllers, we might find something like this there, like a lot of conditional logic. There are no if statements, but they are all conditionals, right? They just hidden at the end of the lines, because there are lots of except and only, and like this, and like this. So I could make much more of these screenshots, like how do we do this? So why do we do this? I think there are three reasons. It's very easy for me to say, like, I think, but 2 weeks ago I didn't know any of this. Okay, so REST misunderstanding. We use respond to, and we kind of think about DDD, but we don't know how to apply it in our systems. So let's start with the REST. So what do we get here? Any ideas? A post, yeah, but what it is? Is it a resource? All right, then what do we get here? The same resource? Yeah, that's kind of strange, but yeah, we get a representation of this resource. And actually, these are two different representations of the same resource. And REST is all about representations, and you never get the resource itself. All you get is a different representation, and there could be many representations, and this is fine. And they can be very different. So developers who are limiting themselves with one controller per model, they simply do not understand Rails. We kind of get the general idea, but when it comes to details, we suck. Then someone could say that we serve different representations with respond to. I have bad news, because it's not representations, and let's talk about it. So how do we use respond to? On a small scale, looks innocent. On a larger scale, looks completely weird. So we have 5 formats within same action, within one controller, and probably we have more than one action. And the trick here is that, so the question is why it should be in the same controller. So all these things, they are used differently. And yeah, they will be used in a different way, and they require different subsets of data, and they been generated differently using different tools. So it actually makes sense to create a separate REST representations, not the single one with different formats. So the solution is to create top-level namespaces in your controllers folder, and many teams already do this. For example, for API, they realize that the structure of their API doesn't reflect the structure of their main application, so they create a separate folder and move and create a separate set of controllers for the API. But we can do it for feeds, for RSS feeds. We can do the same for reports. I don't think you really have like the PDF for every action in every controller in your application. So it would be much easier to deal with PDF generation logic if it would be in the same place, rather than it would be spread across all the application. So it's, again, it's pretty easy thing, but I don't know why we are not doing this. All right, and let's try to apply some DDD kind of stuff to what we are doing. And yeah, we know that DDD is about the same language between business and programmers, but we are interested in the idea of bounded context here. So the idea is that, all right, let me give you an example. So we have an article, and authors can create articles, and articles have title and body and author. But on the other hand, there should be there are moderators, and they should during the moderation process, they must add a publication date and the category. Without them, they are not allowed to save this article. So how do we do it usually? So we create another action, and we add a bunch of conditional validations, and that's it. But if you think about it as and apply DDD, you see that there are two different bounded contexts. Like the first one is article editing and creation, and the second one is moderation. So there is no such thing as a universal article here. So there is no the first one is a true article and the second one is a kind of fake temporary article we'll be using for moderation. No, they are both correct and correct representations, and they are both fine. So yeah, and the trick is that representation depends on context, both in terms of behavior and data set. So it is important. We are not only showing different fields, the actions can be different, right? So here's how it looks applied to our folder, to our controller structure. So you can see So we have this moderation. So first of all, it lies inside web folder, and then we have this moderation, and then there is this article controller, which has its own action for editing. So the good part is that, as you can imagine, we have another logic for authorization, because we don't want moderator to be allowed. No, we don't want to simple authors to moderate articles. Then if it would be a single controller, what would we do? We add more conditional logic there. If it's a separate thing, then you don't need conditionals per action. You don't even need conditionals per controller. Maybe you can create a separate application controller within moderation namespace, and then just use it as a parent. So good news, it is fully supported by Rails, and you can do it and should do it from the day one when you started working with Rails. So all you should do is learn how to define properly this stuff like scope and namespace, and you're done. So instead of complex and universal controllers, you get many simple controllers for specific representations and for specific bounded contexts. Alright, it makes it much easier to understand what is your application about. It has zero long-term cost. Rails supports this. It reflects the URL structure you have. That's pretty important one. And it reduces number of if statements in controller, or conditional logic, let's say, in your controllers. You get longer controller names, but this is your business logic, this is your business domain. So if you have nested things, this is probably makes sense. So no response to, separate namespaces per way of usage, and introduce more namespaces per bounded context inside. Next thing, violating MVC pattern. MVC is actually meant to be modular, and the question is what is modularity? I think for most of us it's more like a buzzword. Even my previous talk was called a way to a modular development, like from Rails, something like that. So what makes a system modular? Like modules, right? So if two modules are interconnected, then it's not a modularity. One depends on another, and another one depends on the first one. We can't call it a modularity. So a modularity is the lack of circular dependencies or connections. What does it mean in practice? In practice, it means that controllers can know about stuff in your models, but models shouldn't know anything about controllers, models, services, external services, and all the stuff. And yet, models that send notifications, like 90% of Rails projects. And part of this we do by ourselves, part of this we bring with stuff like device, and yeah, there are more gems that violate in MVC, and we love them because like they give us so much functionality for free, like active admin, or this is an example of acts as API usage. And what is wrong with it? Any ideas? Something specific. Yeah, but the fact is that it's not the logic that we relate. It's actually a view inside model. It's not that the model. It's not that view generates logic depending on the model, on what it had in model. It's the model that has instructions how to generate views. So we have no layers here. And again. Yeah, and yeah, the most favorite one. So how to put current user into models. And even DHH in his Getting Real screencasts, he shows us how to use this and like advocates for globals and for globals inside mixins, inside your inside globals, inside mixins, inside your models. Yeah. And these globals we should use for current user. All right. So how do we violate MVC? So all of these things, they're like, you could think of them as of ways how we make our life more complicated. So we do plain models, and it makes our life harder. We do plain controller structure, and it also does our life harder. And we violate MVC, and at some point it strikes back. So we use Rails features that violate MVC. We ignore differences between application layers. We use gems that violate MVC, and we are not distinguishing application logic from business logic. And let's talk about it. So what is application logic, actually? In the example here, let's think of it. The fact that we need to ask a user a confirmation of a password, is it a business logic? Is it a part of our domain? What about this small checkbox? Is it a part of our domain, or is it more like a technical detail? This captcha thing. So the trick is that it's all application logic. It's not a business logic, but still it is in our models. So Rails gives us this power to bring application related logic into models. You have a question? It could be a business logic, right? You're right. It could be a business logic, of course, but sometimes it's not. All right. So Rails gives us this stuff, and it's, well, maybe not differently. In some contexts, in some scenarios, it might be a business logic, but sometimes it's an application logic. and it's still in our models. All right. But what models should be about? Like we have, like, are they about persistence? We have database and like active record stuff, and but we learned yesterday that not all of the models should be active record models. We can have some models without persistence layer at all. And persistence actually is just a technical detail. So it is hard to ignore this detail in Rails, but it is. So, and what if we try to use models like if they were domain models? Is it even possible? And what is the domain model? The domain model is a system that imitates structure of functioning of explored domain, and it should be adequate to related domain. So domain model, we know that it doesn't depend on programming language. Whether you're implementing your domain logic in PHP or Java, it should remain the same. You can probably even draw it on the board. Of course, it shouldn't depend on the type of the application you develop, whether it's a web application or desktop application or mobile application. Your domain logic remains the same, domain models. And of course, it shouldn't depend on framework. But yet, we all have this in our models. So we just put everything there, like almost everything. And yeah, because we have this fat model skinny controllers idea, and I think it's still floating around. So I'm not diving into this, but let's talk about next topic. So how does the complexity creep in? So at the beginning we have this simple controller actions. So we have new employee. If it's valid, it gets saved. Then we redirect user. If something goes wrong, then we render the form. But then a business guy comes and asks us to add this small checkbox so that when we create an employee, we also want to promote him to administrator if the checkbox is set. Then it becomes a little bit more messy. And what do we do here? And this is probably not the whole thing. We should think about wrapping this thing into a transaction, adding some email notification. But the question is, how do we fight complexity? And the first rule is to avoid it. So seriously, when we get a task like this, and we see that it's not obvious how to implement it in Rails, like there's no straightforward way. We see it as a challenge, and as a programmers, we love challenges. So we accepted this challenge, and we do a research. We find some unconventional way to do it, but then we find that it's not that straightforward. We do more and more research, and you spend a day or 2 or 3 doing some stupid thing, and then you come to a business guy and say him that, well, it took 3 days to add this small checkbox. So you'll be surprised, but if you tell this business guy that, well, it looks like things might be harder than you expect, and is it really important? Can we tweak the business case a little bit so that I could do this change faster, so it won't take 3 days? So usually there are ways to change the workflow a bit. For example, ask if user should be promoted to administrator on the next step after the first one. or something different, or it's not important on this use case at all. So the second thing is to, if it is important, then we have to learn how to put stuff into proper places so that we don't mix the layers of responsibility. I mean abstraction layers. No. So I'm always making fun of this slogan, but the problem with this slogan is that it makes us think about non-important things. Because there are really important things like what it is all about, and we started to think about size. And it looks like we simply can move different code from one place to another, like because of the size. It doesn't look right. So, and we all smart guys here. It's Wroclaw, so we all know about services. But let's repeat: service encapsulates single process of our business. It takes all the collaborators and performs a given process. So we know how to create a service. We create a class, we simply move the logic there, and we call this this service. And in the controller starts to look almost the same as it looked before, and we have a place to put our business logic. But let's talk about services. And in DDD, Evans defines a service as an action, not a thing. But yet, this is another example. I took it from Arkansas blog. It's from 2013, but still. So you see, what is this? This is state. So we have a class, and this is a state. It is there for purpose. Hmm? Well, yeah, you're right. Probably it's a bad example, but it's not that important. Let me show you a different thing with it. So let's imagine it's a state. Yeah. You're right. Thank you. So, but this thing solves this problem also. So I'll explain why. Actually, I'll explain it now. So what is the difference if the service is a class or a method? So we can do either, but when it is a class, then we should rely on the discipline so that someone's not putting the state of there, because someone who is not very experienced might see a class and decide to introduce the state. So, all right, if we want to get rid of the need to pass payment adapters and stuff like this, we can try to use dry container, and it's pretty simple. You don't even have to read the documentation. It's all like the whole scenario is here. So you simply create a global inside initializer, and you name it config container. You create this object, and then you register multiple containers for all your external dependencies. So for one environment, for test environment, you put a stub implementation there, and for development and production, you put the real thing there. And then in the code, all you need to do, yeah, it's a long line, but anyway, so you resolve this container and you get a real class. And what it gives you, then in your tests, you don't have to care about swapping implementations anymore, and you have a single place where you can keep all these, how to say, like different implementations of external things. So that's definitely a good thing. Yeah. What do you mean? Yeah, this is global state. Yeah, but as I said, the difference is subtle, but it's very important. This is definitely a dirty trick we're using global, but the purpose is important. What we are achieving with this. So what we are achieving, we don't have to deal with more complexity on other layers, right? So and we put all the stuff which is related, which is about replacing real implementation with stubs into one place. So yeah, of course, but this is not a current user thing. So these things are a little bit different. Yeah, the method is the same, but use case is different, and yeah, that's the thing. Okay, this is another example, and there is state here because I wrote it. I know. So I was a huge fan of the interactor gem because I thought that it kind of gives us a way to structure our complex scenarios. And if you don't know how it works, so it gives you this ability to create small classes. And if you have like a few steps in your use case, then you create multiple classes. And then with this additional class, which includes a thing called interactor organizer, you define an order how to launch these things. And there is an idea of rollbacks or something like this inside interactor gem, but I never used it and I'm not sure if it even works and if it's useful. So I've written code like this, and then I decided to get rid of the unimportant stuff, and then all I got is this simple method 4 lines long. So why can't we simply do that? So we take it, we put it into a class, we create a bunch of class methods, and these are methods inside the class, and we simply use them. And as I said, the difference is subtle, but with this system, nobody could introduce the state into this method. Of course, he could use globals, but then probably he wouldn't live for long. All right, that's enough for me for today. I don't know, how about you? And these are like my website, email, and yeah, the Twitter. The Twitter thing is kind of tricky because like I have 2 Twitters, one in Russian, and I usually post something there pretty often, but another one is in English, and I almost not using it. So I decided to put both. So it's up to you to decide now. And if you haven't filled this this survey yet, please do, and we'll see the results tomorrow. I think we'll start with the analyzing results. Okay, thank you. That's it for me. If you have any questions, welcome.